In the years leading up to 2010, it seemed like the apocalypse was everywhere. The financial crash, 9/11 conspiracies, the rise of social media, Alex Jones infiltrating Bohemian Grove, ever-present religious prophecies and alien encounters, environmental catastrophe, and the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012 permeated the internet and anticipated how the following decade would unfold. During this time, I produced a small series of woodcuts influenced by this part of the zeitgeist. They paired end-time symbolism with imagery of unfamiliar landscapes that questioned what was reality and what was hallucination, and became preparatory works for a much larger piece. In 2010, I was awarded a residency in an old, Japanese-era warehouse that had been converted to artist studios called Stock 20. I decided to take advantage of this enormous space by creating a monumental woodcut incorporating all of the various end-time scenarios into one landscape. The form would mimic a project I had made a few years earlier, a woodcut installation. This earlier woodcut depicted my old studio space in 360 degrees. At 7 feet or 213 centimeters high, the prints covered the interior walls of a 9-foot or 3-meter square room. Standing in the center of the room, the space would appear life-sized in the trompe-l'oeil style, where the use of perspective makes it appear possible to step into a 2D space. This new installation would be slightly larger, at 8 feet tall, and consist of 11 separate wood blocks, 3 for each interior wall, with 1 block left out for the entry. A few centimeters on the left and right edges of each block would be identical to allow for a more seamless overlap of the installed prints. I had 8 months to complete the project before the final group exhibition of Stock 20 resident artists. The first step was research. I learned a fun new word, eschatology, meaning the study of the end times. I collected imagery and stories, both ancient and modern, and designed each wall as a set, building up a landscape of eschatological activity. The next most important choices were what would be above and what would frame the entrance to the installation. For the ceiling, I chose to cover it with billowed black fabric, and along the top of the print I put a stripe of black clouds. I hoped this would make a more seamless transition from print to ceiling. I decided to bracket the door with a cave pattern. This would create the feeling of stepping out onto an outcropping. The entryway would be covered with black fabric, mimicking the darkness of a cave. During these 8 months, I worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in order to finish the piece in time for the exhibition. I spent long days drawing, first penciling in the large forms and working out the space, then using marker to ink in the details. As with all my woodcuts, I used a mirror to frequently check the composition, as everything I was drawing would ultimately be printed in reverse. Sometimes I would carve for 12 hours at a time, and so I taught myself how to carve left-handed in order not to overwork my right. Printing each panel was itself an undertaking. Just rolling ink onto the block took almost an hour. It was necessary to use oil-based ink so that it wouldn't dry out before I had a chance to unroll the huge Canson drawing paper onto the block. Printing was done with a wooden spoon. To print 1 block by myself took around 8 hours, as it was necessary to slowly burnish the entire surface area, then carefully peel back parts of the paper, apply more ink, and burnish again until the black ink was smoothly transferred to the paper. I was extremely fortunate to have 3 friends come by the warehouse every week to help me print. Julia, Rachel, and Hank Truck turned a tedious 8-hour job into a fun 3-hour task, and sometimes we were even able to print 2 blocks in a night. The final block was printed 5 days before the opening of the show, just enough time for it to dry. Meanwhile, my friend Kathy took on the job of sewing the ceiling and door covers, and acquiring the white fairy lights that would poke through the ceiling fabric to illuminate the space. The gallery at Stock 20 had a contractor construct a room out of plywood. I hung alligator clips to nails around the top of the interior walls, and clipped the prints in place, making sure the bottoms just touched the floor and the overlapping areas aligned. The prints were curved slightly around the corners, creating a more seamless feel, and each sheet was blue tacked onto its neighbor to hold them in place. Being in the space was overwhelming. with new details constantly coming to attention. I particularly enjoyed the strong smell of the ink. A few people reported intensely dizzying reactions, and others would sit in the space for extended periods, strangely calmed by it. It was both open and overwhelming, tranquil and chaotic. But what was it about? Aside from the various scattered meetings of the iconography, how did this world get to be this way? The answer to that question would come 5 years later in my follow-up piece, a 450-page woodcut graphic novel called Schism, which I will discuss in the next part of this series. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you want to see more of my work, you can find it at the links below. I also live stream twice a week on Twitch. Come say hi, talk about my work, or anything else you feel like. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.